We'd like to reconvene the hearing on the DHS budget. We'll now recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Harmon, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Madam Secretary, for really excellent and helpful testimony this morning, substantive answers to questions, and for your visit last month to the Los Angeles area, where several of us went with you to see LAX, the top terror airport target in the country, and the ports of LA and Long Beach, which is where 50% of our vulnerable container traffic moves, and then the JRIC, the Joint Regional Intelligence Center, which is the Los Angeles Fusion Center, and gets pretty high marks as these things are reviewed. I know you took a lot of the information to heart, and I see a lot of it reflected in your budget. I want to ask you about 3 areas, but I want to make one comment on Gitmo, which has come up in several questions. I know you're not going to respond. This is just a comment by me. In today's news, it says that the 6 Miami men charged with conspiring with Al-Qaeda have 5 of those men have been convicted in a U.S. federal court. I just want to observe that we have a pretty good record in this country in recent years of convicting people charged with the crime of terrorism, and some are U.S. nationals and some are foreign nationals, and I have every confidence that we are able to do this well in U.S. federal courts and U.S. military courts. That's just a statement. Moving along to 3 areas that I want to ask you about. 1, the intelligence and analysis budget is mostly classified. It's not here. What is unclassified is in the budget we're looking at, and I support, of course, the activities in the unclassified budget. But I would like to tell you again, Madam Secretary, how opposed I am to any money spent on the so-called National Applications Office, which is an office that would deploy military satellites over the United States for certain homeland security purposes. I think existing law is adequate. I don't think we need a new office at the Homeland Department, and I absolutely believe that the authorities designed by your predecessor were inadequate. I know you're reviewing this, but I thought you should hear one more time how strongly I feel about it. Number 2.
Representative, on that, we are reviewing NAO, and we also are doing a privacy review related to NAO, just for your information.
Good. Well, I appreciate that, but I think money would be better spent on priorities you've already identified. Let me just mention 2 other issues. 1, in this budget, there is no request of funds for the exit component of the U.S. visit program for fiscal year 2010. You may be planning to use a $30 million carryover account to complete 2 pilot projects. But when we were at LAX together, let me just put both my questions out so that my time doesn't run out. When we were at LAX together, we noticed that the ingress portion of U.S. visit is fairly robust, and they're working on it, but the egress portion is 0. And this is the largest destination airport, I believe, international destination airport in the country. So there is lots of opportunity for us to learn better where the people we have processed into the country are going and whether they're overstaying visas and doing other things we might object to. So I want to ask you about funding the exit portion of U.S. visit. And secondly, you provide funds to send DHS representatives to every fusion center in the U.S. There are 70 such centers. I think that's a great initiative. But we could not find any reference to privacy and civil liberties training, which is a component, I know we all agree, needs to be a central part of what personnel at fusion centers, whether they're DHS personnel or local personnel, do. And the last thing, which I do want to put on the table, is small boats. They are a potential vulnerability at our major ports and our smaller ports. And again, we don't see a specific initiative here when at least it has occurred to me over some years and to your predecessor, Michael Chertoff, that small boats and general aviation were very logical ways that bad things could be brought into our country. Mr. Chairman, could I just let the Secretary answer these questions briefly? My time, I still have 18 seconds.
I will be brief on exit. Yes, and I'm looking at the exit issue more holistically. We have got to have a way to know not only who came in, but who has left, and to match those things up. So we are working on that. Small boat, there is active work being done cross-department-wide in the federal government on that. And with respect to deployment to the fusion centers, yes, I have asked the people we have brought. We have extra money in the Civil Rights and Civil Liberties part of the office. It's reflected in the request for the administrative office of the secretary, but part of that is designed to allow us to do more training.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary. Smart women solving problems is exactly what we need, I think. Do you agree?
Gentlelady's time has expired. But I agree. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Georgia for 5 minutes, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, thank you for coming today. I know that we're all concerned about the safety and security in this nation. Madam Secretary, in your opening statement, you talked about the threat of terrorism, securing our borders, and effective law enforcement. I couldn't agree with you more. There are too many issues that I'd like to bring up now, but we don't have time, but I'd like to address a few. First, I'd like to associate myself with Mr. Longren's comments about the danger of releasing terrorists on American soil. Please don't do that. The threat is very real, and I'm looking forward to hearing an actual plan for what the President intends to do with the terrorists that are being detained in Guantanamo. Secondly, I'd like to talk about oversight. Congress in this committee in particular has responsibility to oversee your department. We'd like to be as helpful and effective as possible. However, members of this committee have waited far too long for the Inspector General reports where millions, even billions of dollars are at stake, and that is completely unacceptable. I'd like to ask you if the increasing funding requested for the IG is going to be sufficient, and if members on this committee can expect more timely responses to their request.
Representative, I believe firmly in the role of an Inspector General, particularly with a department like ours that's still being built as it's like a plane that we're building while we're flying it. And that's why we requested additional funds there. We have a lot of oversight in our committee, in our department. In fact, one of the recommendations of the 9/11 Commission was for Congress to reorganize itself to streamline the oversight so that we were not consistently responding to myriad requests. I want to be with this committee, which I believe is our central authorizing committee in the House of Representatives, as open and responsive and as timely as we can humanly be. We've asked for additional resources to assist us with that.
Well, I hope that's so. There have been multiple requests made that have not been timely, and please see that, if you can, see that they are. While I recognize the importance of ICE staffing increases on the southwest border, I think it is important that our efforts on the border do not in any way detract from ICE's interior enforcement mission in other regions, such as mine in Georgia. Unfortunately, it appears that in the FY10 budget, it fails to request any additional ICE investigators in other areas. That, combined with new guidelines to focus all worksite enforcement on the employers, will significantly weaken ICE's ability to conduct enforcement operations. In my home state, the ICE personnel are overwhelmed by the different investigative missions and definitely need more staff. What is the rationale for requesting no additional ICE investigative resources outside the southwestern border?
Well, first of all, I'm a strong ICE enforcement person. I think that's one of the reasons I was brought into this department. I've been doing immigration prosecutions and supervising that sort of work for a number of years. So I don't want to leave any impression of a false dichotomy that if you do the border, you can't do the interior. You have to do it all because you can't have a system where the border is kind of like a gauntlet. And if you get through, you're free. We want interior enforcement as a system backing up all of the work that we're doing at the border. One area that you should look at is that one of the areas we have plussed up on ICE because I believe also in effective and efficient law enforcement. And all enforcement of immigration doesn't require an investigative agent per se. For example, On the worksite side, we are adding I-9 auditors. These are people who will actually go in and audit the immigration forms employers are required to have. They are lower paid, quite frankly, than agents. Their work, however, will help us direct which employers deserve or merit further attention by the higher paid employees. So even as we look at worksite enforcement, we're saying, okay, now how do we staff it appropriately to get the best yield for the dollars that you are supplying?
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I just have one final comment before my time runs out. During your testimony, you talked about securing the border, and I think it's absolutely critical for national security to do that. And the message I'm getting out of the administration is that's not going to be done. We see no funds to further the fencing and things like that. And I just hope that you, as Secretary, will be a very strong advocate for securing both borders and not giving amnesty to the criminals here in this country already. Thank you, Madam Secretary.
Sir, may I make a point about the fence, however, just to be very clear. We are completing the fence that has already been appropriated. We are adding technology, the virtual fence now. The first big section is underway. We've now approved the technology. Some of the glitches that occurred before have been corrected. So that will be underway. This budget does not prevent us for doing some more fencing as part of a tactical infrastructure with technology and boots on the ground in other parts of the border. But I have never believed and have testified before that simply a fence from Texas or from Brownsville over to San Diego would by itself be effective. We have to have a system.
Well, I agree with that, Madam Secretary. In fact, I visited P-28 last year with this committee and was impressed with the possibility of doing that, and I understand some of the problems that are involved there, and I just hope that we push forward and get this done so that we secure our border. I think it's absolutely critical for national security. Thank you, Madam Secretary. My time's expired. Thank you.
We now recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania for 5 minutes, Mr. Carney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Madam Secretary, thank you for showing up today. I have a couple of questions, but first I did want to kind of follow on the discussion you had with Mr. Dent about the extremist report. You know, I would be remiss also as a veteran to say I took offense at that personally, and the 1 in 3 households in my district did as well. And I really want to understand the process here on how that got out. You told Mr. Dent that you did not authorize that, the release of that.
It was not authorized for release. That is correct.
Okay. What happened?
Sir, it was a product that was being circulated in INA. We know there, first of all, let me be very clear. It is not the only report out there that says that veterans are targeted for recruitment. It was an assessment, not an accusation. We have and are working with veterans groups.
Indeed, but it didn't say that. It didn't say that.
That's right. That's why it should not have gone out. We've apologized for it. The report is no longer available. And we've put in place processes to make sure that does not recur.
That didn't answer how it got out in the first place.
It went out because an employee sent it without authorization.
Is that employee still an employee?
Appropriate personnel action is being taken.
Thank you. How many members of Department of Homeland Security are actually veterans? Do you know?
Well, you've got the Coast Guard, which are active
right.
duty.
Yeah.
It's over 25%.
Over 25%.
Including the Deputy Secretary.
Good. I wonder what their take on it was as well. I'll change the topic here in a second. I just got to calm down a little bit. But it really hit home hard to me and to our district and to a number of others, frankly. And you know, this not a good start when I go to town hall meetings and I hear people calling for your resignation. And it is really a problem. You know, we got to address this. We really do. And I know you apologize to the American Legion. That's a great first step. But there are a lot of other veterans groups out there that I don't know if you've reached out to them as well.
We have.
Okay, good. You know it's just kind of a pall hanging over things.
You know, Representative, one of the things that we have talked with, particularly American Legion about, is how we provide at the Department of Homeland Security opportunities for veterans who are returning for work, because they're a great employment source for us. They're well-trained. They want to serve their country. They've already demonstrated that by their military service. So, you know, sometimes, to use the cliche, you have to make lemonade out of a lemon. And now we are working with making sure that DHS is helping them with job fairs and opportunities of that sort, so that we continue our linkage with the veterans community.
Okay, thank you. I did have a question on UAVs on the border. What is the status of that program? Where are we?
There are UAVs being used on the border.
How many?
I can't give you the number at any given time, but we are using them as part of our process of securing and having operational control there.
If you could get a more detailed account from your staff, that would be great. Are you manned up enough? Do you have enough pilots? Do you have enough analysts on the ground to follow the to do the
we
job?
believe we do, and we believe the budget request is adequate to fill those needs.
Okay. No further questions.
Would the gentleman yield for a minute? Here I am, right here.
Yes,
Would you yield for a minute? Let me apologize to the chairman and to the, and I'm just going to raise questions that I hope we'll have a conversation. I'm only asking to yield because I'm in markup, and I will conclude quickly. I'll thank you very much. Madam Chair, I just want to get back with you on some issues dealing with TSA in terms of their expanded duties at airports.
Ms. Jackson-Lee, it is a problem for you to come in and get in front of a lot of the other members who've been here for 3 hours. So I'm going.
I'll yield back the chairman.
Yeah.
I'll just say that I will ask the questions on the record.
Yes.
Thank you. Didn't mean to be a problem. I'm just in markup. So thank you very much.
All right. Gentleman from Louisiana for 5 minutes, Mr. Gow.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First of all, Madam Secretary, I'd like to thank you for the trip that we made together down there in New Orleans. I thought it was quite productive. I'd like to commend you on the changes that you made with respect to the local TRO office. They have been much more efficient and much more cooperative in bringing PW projects forward. My main concern now is with the appeal process. As you know, Project Katrina Charity Hospital was the main provider for indigent care. After Katrina, much of that care was took upon by local hospitals, and they incurred hundreds of millions of dollars in debt. And Toro Hospital, for instance, was threatened with closure, but for its purchase by the state's Children's Hospital. FEMA has denied the state of Louisiana's first appeal in regards to Charity Hospital. And I believe the denial has dramatically delayed the recovery of the healthcare system down there in the 2nd District and basically threatened the system with bankruptcy. The appeal process has continually does not take into account the plight of the suffering poor down there in the district and the struggles of institutions down there in the 2nd District post-Katrina. My question to you is, if you can tell us what your team has done in Region 6 that is different from what the Bush administrations did in regards to PW appeals.
Representative, we have done a lot to streamline and resolve the appeal process with respect to the issues in your district. As you know, there's also now arbitration language that Senator Landrieu got enacted. We are working with the White House on finalizing the actual process by which we will be able to arbitrate claims. My hope is that for the things we are unable to resolve, and we really are trying to resolve as many as we can now, we want to move the Katrina recovery forward as expeditiously as possible. But we have a responsibility as well. These are taxpayer dollars. We're not just given an unending pocket here to make sure they go to qualified projects that need to be compensated. And there are some legitimate differences of opinion. Those ultimately, I believe, will end up in arbitration. We want to facilitate that arbitration so that decisions are made and people know finally what to do. So we're working all hands on deck on that.
And you must also understand the frustration of our constituents down there in the district. It's been 4 years.
And I've been in office
approaching.
about 100 days, so
I
that
fully
4 years was
understand.
not my watch.
I fully understand that. And I just want to, again, reflect the chairman's position on efficiency. What would be the timeline to have this arbitration panel instituted to address these issues?
We're working to have it done as soon as possible.
Okay. Would that imply weeks, months?
Sir, as soon as possible, but within the foreseeable future. I don't want to give you a deadline because everybody has to review, okay, and there are lots of checks that have to be made, but it is moving expeditiously through the process.
Okay. And with respect to the appeal process itself, I know that the decisions are made by the FEMA office or FEMA agencies, and oftentimes some of those people who denied the original applications might be deciding the appeal process. Is there a system for a more efficient and objective determination in the appeal process?
Well, the appeal process is set, and the technical appeal process is set by regulation. It has worked well in many areas and in many instances, but I think Katrina is so unusual in scope and the like that the arbitration add-on and augmentation is going to be very helpful, not only to resolve things quickly, but to give people a sense that they really had their shot.
Thank you very much. I yield the remainder of my time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. We now recognize the gentlelady from Nevada, Ms. Titus, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Madam Secretary, for being here. I would like to tell you, as a former state legislator, I was very glad to see this budget and hear your comments about the Real ID program, because it was estimated in Nevada it would have cost us about $66 million to try to implement it, and we did see it as an unfunded mandate, so I appreciate the direction that's going. I wanted to ask you, though, about another program. It's the Model Port of Entry program. McCarran Airport is one of about 20 airports that's part of this program, and I've been talking to officials at McCarran, and they're concerned that some of the operations there are dramatically understaffed. In just 1 week alone, CBP actions resulted in losses of about $120,000 just for one airline because they had to delay and cancel some flights. And so I just wonder, I'm sure this is the case probably for other airports, and some of our airlines are kind of threatening not to fly to Las Vegas because it is such a problem, and we certainly can't lose more tourists coming with the state of the economy. And I just wondered if there's some oversight of this, if you're looking at it, if we can have some input about how we are involved in the decisions that are made in that program so we won't have that kind of problem in the future.
Absolutely. If you have information that you know of at McCarran, if you would give it to us. But we are, yes, looking at that. And the last thing we want to do is deter legitimate commercial and tourism traffic out of a pilot. So, yes.
Well, if I could get that information to somebody, we could work on that.
Exactly, yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Since we only have a few minutes, if we can limit to 2 minutes, we might can at least get a question or two from the rest of our members. Mr. Olson from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I will do my best to limit it to 2 minutes. Madam Secretary, thank you for coming today. And what's become a theme between you and I in the two times you've testified here, I'd like to talk about FEMA and the recovery efforts from Ike. And Ike's no longer headline news, but the recovery continues, and in many places it's just beginning. Third most destructive hurricane to make landfall in the United States, and many of the communities affected by it desperately need help. Specifically, if the reimbursement deadlines for debris removal and emergency protective measures were extended 6 months, it would provide much needed relief, particularly on the Bolivar Peninsula area. But unfortunately, FEMA recently made a decision to deny a deadline extension request for Ike recovery efforts, saying only that they reviewed the information and decided against it. And I must point out again that communities affected by Katrina, which was an equally devastating hurricane, received numerous deadline extensions for both categories. However, with respect to debris removal, Texas received only one deadline extension, and with respect to emergency protective measures, we didn't receive an extension at all. And please don't interpret this as some sort of complaint about Katrina, or because that was a very devastating hurricane in that region. You know, the most devastating one with Andrew in our history. Well, Galveston 1900 was the most devastating one. But the point is Texas did not receive an extension at all. All we're asking for is fair and equal treatment. And can you give me an insight as to why these deadlines were not extended and what we can do on a federal level to ensure that Southeast Texas gets the resources they need so they can return to a normal life?
Representative, there are a number of reasons why. Part of it is the amount that already had been, I think, distributed to Texas for that hurricane. In other words, it went to the state for distribution out to the communities. I would be happy to supply you with a briefing on exactly what has gone out already and why those particular extensions were not granted.
I'd greatly appreciate it. I thank the Secretary. Yield back my time.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, I'd like to play a little good cop here and use 30 of my seconds. I want to commend you for the work that you did with the H1N1 virus, and also make sure that although all members may not have had the ability to have you in their district, I have. And we can all sit here and throw rocks and, you know, write in the sand, but I don't think anyone, neither any of our constituents, can ever say that they haven't ever done something that they would have liked to have done something differently. We need to judge you on the work that you're doing, and the work that you're doing is excellent, and I want to be on the record in saying that. And that's what we need to move forward. You've been from California, from Los Angeles to Long Beach to San Diego, all over the place, and that's how I'm judging, and that's how my constituents are evaluating the work. So keep it up, and it's been a pleasure having you as our secretary for the short time that you've been there.
Thank you.
The second thing I want to say is to bring to your attention that on April 29th, we had a TWIC hearing, and it didn't go very well. I don't know if you heard that. Some of the concerns were the lack of the delay of the TWIC card readers, and just the insistence on looking at new technology and old delivery fashions of people coming in instead of looking in the future. Your representative spoke about, oh, we're looking at this new technology because it can be hot and it's outside and raining. And I proceeded to share with her that we can go to any airport and you see the folks going in through the back, coming into the terminal, swiping their card, which is outside, rain, winter, sleet, etc. So on behalf of the chairman and our subcommittee, I would just urge you to do a double back on what happened in that hearing and look at the questions that we brought forward, and your addressing it would be very helpful. Finally, since this is a budget hearing that we're having here, I'll just read my two questions in for the record. One is that currently we have ships, and I've discussed this with you, we have ships that the average ship is 5,600 to 6,000 TEUs. The largest ships are 10,000, and the even larger ones now are 14,500. That means that a ship is actually larger than the Empire State Building. Currently, in our very large ports, we are not prepared with the appropriate fire boats to put out a major disaster that could occur. And so if not in this year's budget, in future budgets, I'd like to have a further discussion and consideration of maybe us looking at the top 10 to start or a project of the top 5, but it's a disaster waiting to happen. Those cruise ships, dirty bombs, etc., it could be disastrous for us all. And then finally, my second question was, in the budget, you have an increase for canines. However, it's, according to my votes, primarily focused on ferries. And I have a tremendous amount of passenger rail, metro rail, again, susceptible to all sorts of terror. And I'd like to see it expanded to include canines for, more canines for rail as well.
We'll work with you on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
We now recognize the gentleman from Texas, New Mexico, Mr. Lujan, for 5 minutes, 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, it's great to see you again, and appreciate how accessible you've been to each of us as members of Congress, but also to the committee on continuing to provide information to us. Madam Secretary, I would like to begin by first just emphasizing the fact of the importance of our firefighters and first responders, as Mr. Pascal did. No reason for me to get into those details, but to just make sure that we're reinforcing the thought that we do need to provide them the support and resources they need, as we usually don't appreciate them until we need them as we do many of our men and women who serve our country in different capacities, and we need to continue to thank them every day. Madam Secretary, as I've done in the past, visiting with you specifically about our national laboratories and our ability to engage with them, to utilize the technological capabilities that we have, to be able to strengthen the tools and resources that you will need, and all of the personnel that you're responsible with providing them the tools and resources they need to do their jobs effectively. Recently, Madam Secretary, I was able to visit with you about taking advantage and moving forward with utilizing the National Infrastructure Simulation and Analysis Center, NISAC, out of New Mexico, and I appreciate the fact that we're taking advantage of their capabilities. In the area of cybersecurity, though, because of some of the modeling capabilities that NISAC can present, I would encourage you to explore opportunities within the department to see how we could take advantage of the capabilities in that regard, specifically with cyber attacks, that we could probably help provide some additional information or protection with. And I'm encouraged of the fact of what we've seen in the budget in these specific instances. I would just like to close, Mr. Chairman, Madam Secretary, with making sure that we're looking to see how some of the small businesses who have done a great job developing technologies, moving forward with providing some of the support that we need to keep our port safe, to keep roads safer, whether they're looking at cargo, whatever mechanism that they're utilizing to assist us in that way, that we're encouraging and we're making sure that they're providing an opportunity to be able to compete with some of those that may be larger and have more resources to keep them out of playing in this field and providing their expertise. And so making sure, Mr. Chairman, that we're really looking to see how we can support both women and minority small businesses with the technological capabilities that they've been able to bring forward and help provide us some support with. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We now yield to the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Clark.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's good to see you again, Madam Secretary.
Yes.
Earlier this session, the House unanimously passed H.R. 559, which is what we call the Fast Redress Act of 2009. This legislation will require the Department of Homeland Security to develop a comprehensive cleared list of all lawful citizens who are mistakenly labeled as terrorists and placed on the Do Not Fly list or the watch list. The President's budget acknowledges that this is a huge problem and has requested $1.3 million and one full-time employee for the management of the DHS TRIP, TRIP,
Right.
Travel Redress Inquiry Program.
Right.
How will the additional funding and staffing allocation improve the overall effectiveness of the program? How many employees are currently dedicated to the program? And additionally, does the President's budget discuss the centralization of the DHS TRIP processing system? Can you please explain what this centralization entails, and how will it work with secure flight in the future?
The answer is yes, but I think given the time constraints, what I'd like to do is arrange for a briefing for you, and we will work with you on the bill that's moving over to the Senate on this issue. The goal, obviously, is to remove people from the lists who don't need to be there so that we can focus on those who do.
Mr. Chairman, just in closing, it has really become a very serious problem out there for many Americans who are traveling of Muslim descent, Asian, South Asian, Middle Eastern, Caribbean, Irish American, children. I mean, it's cutting across the board, and it's really, I think, a point where we should be modernizing this system so that we're not misidentifying so many people. They feel very threatened by the process and very stigmatized by it.
Yes, and I think their representative, one of the things, there are different lists, as you know, and different processes by which one's name gets on a list, but where we're focused now not only is on who gets on, but how quickly we can resolve removing someone who is mistakenly on a list. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Madam Secretary, two items. One is Mr. Gao, who has had to leave. FEMA did change its appeal process last year because there were so many things happening in Louisiana. So there is an independent body that that addresses that, and I think you'll see some legislation really making that law going forward. The last question for me is, there's been a lot of questions around FEMA acts today, and the issue for this committee is whether or not is your opinion or the administration's opinion that FEMA should stay in DHS or should it be taken out? What is your position? What is the administration's position? Do you care to comment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you know, the Senate just confirmed the new administrator for FEMA last night, Craig Fugate. So we now have an administrator who has an extensive background in emergency management in Florida. But it is my position, it's the position of the administration, that FEMA should remain within the Department of Homeland Security.
Thank you very much. Madam Secretary, thank you for being generous with your time. Hearings adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.